The third great Indian religion is called Jainism. It's Jainism. And I want to start by showing you some parallels between Siddhartha Gautama, the Shakyamuni Buddha, or the historical Buddha, and Nadaputa Vardhamana, or Mahavira, the great Tirthankara, which means the hero of Jainism. There are some interesting parallels that are almost too striking to be viewed as merely coincidental, which has caused some to question whether the historical narrative about Siddhartha Gautama and the historical narrative about Nadaputa Vardhamana are really narratives about the same person, just with different names. And you can decide what you think about that, but I think it's interesting that there are these parallels and so many similarities. For example, the core concept in Buddhism is the Buddha, or the awakened or enlightened one, is the great guru or example for others to become enlightened. And personal enlightenment and transcendence, of course, is the key concept in Buddhism. In Jainism, the core concept is the guidance of the Tirthankaras, or the waymakers, if you will, the crossing makers, or ford finders, they're called, to help you cross from this world into the world of spirit. And of course, the emphasis is once again on personal enlightenment and transcendence. The time period for Siddhartha was the 5th century BCE, and the time period for Nadaputa was the 5th century BCE. The place of development was the Ganges River region for Siddhartha, and also for Nadaputa, the place of development was the Ganges River region. Authoritative sources for Siddhartha, well, none exist from the era of Siddhartha's life. They all appear hundreds of years later. Authoritative sources for Nadaputa, none from the era of Mahavira's life, or his life, and there are no materials from this era that have been found verifying the existence and accomplishment of other Tirthankaras. The place of origin for Siddhartha and his views was Nepal. The place of origin for Nadaputa was India. Now, significant events in Siddhartha's life, and I'm just going to run through these very quickly, and then I'll go through significant events in Nadaputa's life. Siddhartha, he was born in Nepal in the Himalaya mountains into the Shakya tribe. Maya, his mother, dreamed a white elephant entered her side, and Buddha was conceived. Siddhartha was supposedly born miraculously from her side, and she died 1 week later. 2. Siddhartha was born a prince and a person of privilege about whom a two-pronged prophecy was given. He would become a great ruler, or if he experienced suffering, he would become a great spiritual leader. 3. Siddhartha's father secluded him in the palace grounds, attempting to shield him from suffering, as he wanted Siddhartha to become the great ruler and successor. 4. Siddhartha married a woman chosen by his father, and he had a child. 5. Siddhartha disobeyed his father and left the palace compound, after which he encountered each of the following: A. An old man, crooked and toothless. B. A sick man, wasted by disease. C. A corpse being taken for cremation. And D. A sannyasin, or holy man, who had renounced the world and wandered with no possessions, but who seemed to be at peace. 6. At age 29, Siddhartha left family and home to live a life of austerity and poverty, to wander the world seeking truth. 7. Siddhartha spent 6 years traveling and listening to various teachers, none of whom satisfied him concerning his primary spiritual questions: why is there suffering, and what may be done about it? 8. Siddhartha became a practitioner of extreme asceticism, which nearly killed him, but his questions remained unresolved. And 9. Siddhartha became, quote, awake or enlightened, end quote, after choosing to live a balanced life of moderation and meditating under the bodhi tree, which is the root word that we get bodhisattvas, or the manifestations of the Buddha spirit, from. Now, Nadaputa, significant events in his life. 1. Nadaputa became the last of 24 Tirthankaras, or crossing makers they call them, or ford finders, transcendent humans who have guided mankind in its development toward the highest plane of existence, the plane of pure spirit. 2. Mahavira, his name, which means hero. Mahavira's life is shrouded in legend and uncertainty. There are no records that exist from his time to verify the stories about him or his teachings. 3. Mahavira was born into an aristocratic family from a noble clan. 4. Mahavira married and had one child. 5. Mahavira forsook all, including his family, to pursue a life of detachment and the quest for enlightenment. 6. Mahavira embraced extreme asceticism and harshness of life, both self-inflicted and from others. 7. Mahavira attempted to avoid harming any living thing to the extreme of straining his drinks and sweeping the path ahead of where he walked. 8. Mahavira spent 12 years of wandering meditation and extreme mortification. 9. Eventually, Mahavira experienced an epiphany at age 42 that he described as a great liberation, in which he no longer experienced the bondage of shame, pain, suffering, or loss. And 10. From this time forward, Mahavira existed in a transcendent state as a jina, or conqueror, allowing him to live with total detachment from the world. And of course, you may remember in Theravada Buddhism and the teachings of Siddhartha, detachment from the world and the elimination of all desire was the key, or is the key, to becoming awakened or enlightened. Now let's look at Jainism and its background in general. Along with Buddhism, Jainism became one of the two greatest religious views in the Ganges River region, opposing traditional Hinduism. Both Buddhism and Jainism objected to the caste system, the power of the Brahmin priesthood, and the sacrifice of animals. Jainism remained relatively contained within this geographic region, as the practitioners did not attempt to convert others to their viewpoint. There are 24 Tirthankaras, or crossing makers, in Jainism. These are transcendent humans who have guided mankind in its development toward the highest plane of existence, the plane of pure spirit. And they have appeared throughout history, from a time in remote and distant past to the appearance of Mahavira. The followers of the Tirthankaras must pass through the waters, not cross over them, emphasizing symbolically the necessity of experiencing life and its struggles. Historical verification for the existence of the 24 Tirthankaras is not possible. There are no records that we can look at. Mahavira, whose real name was Nadaputa Vardhamana, and whose life is shrouded in legend and uncertainty, may have existed, but as I pointed out earlier, it may be a parallel story to the story of Siddhartha, and they may in fact be the same person, just with a little different take from the perspectives of their followers. There are striking parallels between the life of Gautama Buddha and Mahavira, and these parallels really force us to consider that possibility that it's not two people but the same person with a few unique details applied to their lives. The worldview of Jainism rejects a belief in a creator God in favor of an eternal, self-existing universe. In Western culture, from the Enlightenment forward, this came to be known as the steady state theory for the existence of the universe. It's eternal, self-existing, and self-sustaining. So that viewpoint is much more like Jainism than it is like Judaism or Christianity here in the West. Jainism believes in a cyclical universe of rising and falling, of good and evil, in which Tirthankaras sometimes appear to point humanity toward what is good. Jainism also believes in hylozoism, the idea that everything has life or spirit within, not only humans and animals, but also plants and seemingly inanimate objects such as stones. Jainism believes that everything is comprised of two realities, jiva, which is soul and spirit, and ajiva, which is non-soul or non-life. It also believes that man, since he has self-consciousness, is capable of emphasizing jiva over ajiva, enabling a person to transcend material desires, attractions, and attachments in favor of freedom and to escape from all bondage in the spirit realm. Jainism believes in karma, or the law of retribution, as a kind of spiritual coding that controls what will happen to an individual at death. It also believes in samsara, reincarnation, where individuals return to earthly material existence in higher or lower forms dependent upon the karma they have accrued in previous lives. Jainism believes in a realm beyond earth where, quote, superhuman beings, end quote, sometimes referred to as deities or gods, exist and who may aid and assist people here on earth. These beings are also bound by the laws of karma and samsara and may return to earth in lower forms. Jainism believes the goal in life is spiritual transcendence, which means that one has become completely liberated in spirit. Attainment to this level apparently frees one from the constraints of karma and samsara. So what may be said about the ethics and morality of Jainism? Well, first, Jainism is committed to nonviolence, or ahimsa. This is best understood as, quote, gentleness or harmlessness, end quote. Jainism is also committed to truth or non-lying, satya. This means avoiding all falsehood and all exaggeration. It asserts that all truth is relative due to human subjectivity, but truthfulness should still be attempted, even though human perspectives are limited. So ultimate truth for humans is not really possible. Jainism believes in non-stealing, or asteya. This is understood as not taking from others anything that is not first offered to them. Jainism also is committed to chastity, or brahmacharya. This is complete celibacy for monks and nuns and fidelity to one's spouse for everyone else. And finally, Jainism is committed to non-attachment or detachment, which is aparigraha. Attachment results in personal bondage. Therefore, laypersons must cultivate a spirit of generosity toward others and self-discipline concerning the acquisition of material possessions. For monks and nuns, absolute detachment, or the rejection of the material world, is the ideal. Jainism also supports a view known as salekkhana, which means holy death. But this is not to be confused with suicide, but is instead, quote, willing oneself, end quote, to depart from the material world into the world of pure spirit. Self-starvation, which is known as the, quote, final fast, end quote, is the preferred method for salekkhana. Now, there are 4 branches of Jainism. The first 2 are the largest branches, and the first one is called the Digambaras, which means sky-clad. This group believes in the renunciation of all material reality. It restricts women from becoming monks, and it practices nudity, and it insists Mahavira was not married. The second major branch of Jainism are the Svetambaras, or the white-robed ones. They're dressed in white, and they promote asceticism. Women may become nuns, and it also allows that Mahavira was married, but that he left his family to seek perfection. The other 2 branches of Jainism, which are not as significant, are the Thanakavasis, which means simple buildings. This group opposes temple worship and the veneration of statues of Mahavira, and they meet in simple buildings. Then there are the Terapanthis. This group rejects the use of images for devotion and have a supreme guru, Acharya, who oversees faith and practice. So what are the practices in Jainism? Well, first, purification and perfection are accomplished by the individual for himself without the intervention of another. So Jainism, once again, is a works system. Through your own efforts and your own works, you become enlightened or, quote, saved. Devotional acts and rituals, which are called puja, are not required, but they may be performed for the Tirthankaras and deceased leaders and the gods. A fasting period called Paryusana during the Jain New Year, which is in August and September, occurs annually, lasting for 15 days for Digambaras and 8 days for Svetambaras. An annual confession and a plea for pardon from anyone a person has offended occurs each year. Now, what are the Jain scriptures that are used as the authority for the teachings and practices of Jainism? Well, first of all, not all branches of Jainism accept the writings as authentic or authoritative, which means those branches must rely on a much more subjective approach. Although, because there are no written works dating from the time that Jainism supposedly originated, even the texts themselves must be called into question as authoritative. The first of these are called the Purvas. There are a total of 14 ancient texts that no longer exist, so there is no way to appeal to them. The second are called Angas, 45 collections of writings supposedly based on the teachings of Mahavira, but impossible to verify. And third are the Upangas, which are collections of laws and rituals, again, impossible to verify. Jain art and architecture has sculptures and temple architecture that tends toward austerity and simplicity. However, there are some exceptions that have occurred, which is probably the result of Hindu artistic influences. Now let's talk a bit more about the core beliefs of Jainism. Jainism believes in gods, believes in the body, and believes in the soul for individual beings. There are 5 supreme beings in Jainism. First are the Tirthankaras, which are called Jinas. Second are the Siddhas, which are liberated souls existing in heaven. Third are elders, or religious teachers known as gurus. And 4 are teachers that are subordinate to the elders. And 5 are the monks themselves. The spiritual path of Jainism involves what are known as the 3 jewels. There's a 4th added in, which is asceticism, but the 3 primary jewels are first, right knowledge, second, right faith, and third, right conduct. And then, of course, right detachment, asceticism, becomes the 4th. There are 5 vows that Jains must take. The first of these vows is ahimsa, which is non-harm and non-violence, and this is extreme to the point of not harming any living thing whatsoever. Second, speaking the truth or honesty. Third, sexual abstinence or self-restraint. Fourth, not taking what is not given to one. And fifth, detachment from the world. There is also the concept in Jainism known as gunasthan, which involves the 14 stages of awakening from this life into the life of pure spirit. Liberation from attachment, of course, is the goal. Now, the first stage of awakening is the stage of a wrong believer, the lowest stage with ignorance, delusion, and intense attachments and aversions. This is the normal condition of all souls involved in the mundane world and is the starting point of spiritual evolution. Stage 2 is the stage of one who has a slight taste of right belief, indifference to reality with occasional vague memory of spiritual insight. Stage 3 is a stage of mixed belief. Fleeting moments of curiosity towards understanding reality occur during this stage. Stage 4 is the stage of one who has a true belief, but has not yet mastered self-discipline. Awareness of reality with trust developed in the right view, combined with willingness to practice self-discipline, is a part of this stage. The soul may be able to subdue the 4 passions, namely anger, pride, deceit, and greed. Stage 5 is the stage of partial self-control. The soul now begins to observe some of the rules of right conduct with a view to perfect itself. With the discipline of introductory or minor vows, the soul starts on the process of climbing the spiritual ladder. Stage 6 is a stage of complete self-discipline, although sometimes brought into wavering through negligence. Major vows taken up with firm resolve to control passions. There may be failures due to lack of full control over passions and carelessness. Stage 7 is the stage of self-control without negligence. In this stage, we find the intense practice of vows, which assist better self-control and replace carelessness with spiritual diligence and vigor. Stage 8, the stage of one in whom the passions are still occurring in a gross form. Closer to perfect self-control over actions and higher control over mind, thought, and passions, with the soul ready for reductions of the effects of conduct, diluting karma, is a significant part of this stage. Stage 9, the stage of one who practices the process called anavritti karana, in whom, however, the passions are still occurring. Higher control over removal of passions and elimination of conduct-diluting karma now begins. Stage 10, the stage of one in whom the passions occur in a subtle form. Complete elimination of all passions except for subtle degrees of attachment. Stage 11, the stage of one who has suppressed every passion, but still does not possess omniscience or all-knowingness. Suppressed passions and lingering conduct-diluting karma may rise to drag the soul to lower stages. There are fleeting experiences in this stage of equanimity. Stage 12, the stage of one who has annihilated every passion but does not yet possess omniscience. This is the point of no return. All passions as well as conduct-diluting karma are eliminated. Permanent internal peace is now achieved. No new bondage occurs from this point onward. Stage 13, the stage of omniscience with activity. All destructive karma is here eliminated. Omniscience, or understanding, is achieved, and the Arahant stage is reached. However, the perfected soul is still trapped in the physical body, but right knowledge has been attained. Stage 14, our final stage, is the stage of omniscience without any activity. The Siddha stage has been reached. Purest soul is associated with no physical body. Now the soul is called Siddha, and it is free from the cycle of rebirths. It is important to note here that the first four Gunasthan stages are related to belief or rationality and perception. As and when the soul acquires rationality and perception, it moves on to the fourth stage in Gunasthan. Stages 5 to 14 relate to conduct. The purity in conduct determines the Gunasthan from stage 5 onwards. Those who have taken the Anavratas minor vows may reach up to the 5th Gunasthan. The 6th to 14th Gunasthan can only be attained by those who have taken the Mahavratas major vows of the Jain ascetic. Now, in addition to the 5 primary vows of Jainism, ahimsa, non-harm, non-violence, no falsehood, no stealing, sexual restraint, and detachment from material things, there are also 3 additional what are known as assistant vows. The first of these is no covetousness, that is, not desiring what is really the rightful possession of others. Second is no weapons. So Jainism is a pacifistic, a non-violent approach to life. And third is limited travel. The vows concerning religious observations involve the following: 48 minutes of meditation per day, that's 1/30 of the day, which seems important in Jainism. Second, periodic 24-hour stays in a monastic community to promote greater enlightenment, and also withdrawal or detachment from the world. And third, support for monasteries and the monastic orders. Jainism also has 11 moral promises that must be made and kept. First is to worship the Tirthankaras and respect for the gurus and belief in their teachings. Second, to face death peacefully through gradual self-starvation or salekkhana. Third, to live the life of an ascetic 6 months in every year. 4, to meditate 3 times each day. 5, to avoid uncooked vegetables. 6, not to eat food after the sunset and before sunrise, and not to drink water before daylight. 7, to stay away from one's spouse during times of detachment. 8, to refrain from engaging in worldly pursuits. 9, to eat only leftovers. 10, to lead the life of an ascetic away from home, wearing ascetic clothes and following the rules of an ascetic. And 11, to remain a novice for the rest of one's life. Now let's take a moment to look at the doctrine of ahimsa because it is so important to Jainism. Ahimsa, of course, is the doctrine of non-harm and non-violence toward any living thing. It promotes the sacredness of all living things. And as a result of this, there are dietary restrictions that are quite rigid. There are occupational restrictions, again, that are quite rigid. And there is the monastic broom, which is the tool used to spiritually protect oneself from harming other living things. Practices and festivals are important in Jainism as well. The first of these is darshan, which is regular worship. In this approach, Jains do not worship deities, but they do venerate the Tirthankaras. This is done through the contemplation of the Tirthankara image or idol, and also by cleaning and anointing the Tirthankara image or idol. There are public temples and home shrines that are used for this type of worship. There are also then daily rituals which involve prayer and meditation, visits to temples and shrines, both mornings and evenings, the reading of the scriptures of the sacred writings, and the practice of charity. Jainism also has 4 rites of passage relating to the cycles of life. The first is betrothal, the second is marriage, the third, having children, and fourth is death. Fasting and festivals also are prominent in Jainism. The Paryusana Parva, which is the end of the Jain year festival, occurs 8 days in August during the monsoon season. The Hindu Diwali is also adopted by Jainism, but in Jainism, it is the veneration of Mahavira rather than the veneration of the Hindu goddess Lakshmi. Any study of Jainism would be incomplete without addressing a little bit about the life of the most famous Jain in its history. And that, of course, is Mohandas K. Gandhi, who was born in 1869 in Porbandar, India. He was from the social class or caste of a tradesman. His mother was illiterate, but her common sense and religious devotion had a lasting impact on his character. He was a good student as a young person, a shy young boy who displayed no signs of leadership. Upon the death of his father, he traveled to England to gain a degree in law. He became involved in the Vegetarian Society and was asked once to translate the Hindu Bhagavad Gita. This classic of Hindu literature awakened in Gandhi a sense of pride in the Indian scriptures, of which the Gita was considered the pearl. Around this time, he also studied the Bible and was struck by the teachings of Jesus Christ, especially the emphasis upon humility and forgiveness. He remained committed to the teachings of the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita throughout his life, although he was critical of aspects of both religions, and he was certainly not a believer in Jesus Christ as the Son of God or God incarnate, and did not become a follower of Jesus, but did admire his teachings. When he completed his degree in law, he returned to India, but he was soon sent to South Africa to practice law. While in South Africa, he was struck by the level of racial discrimination and injustice often experienced by Indians. Notice Indians. We're not talking about the Zulu black South Africans. But it was in South Africa that Gandhi first experimented with campaigns of civil disobedience and protest. He called his nonviolent protest Satyagraha. Despite being imprisoned for short periods of time, he also supported the British under certain conditions. He was decorated by the British for his efforts during the Boer War and the Zulu Rebellion. So in effect, he was really a supporter of the British apartheid system rather than a supporter of equal rights for black South Africans. He spent 21 years in South Africa, and he returned to India in 1915, where he became the leader of the Indian nationalist movement, and he successfully instigated a series of nonviolent protests. This included national strikes for 1 or 2 days. The British sought to ban the opposition, but the nature of nonviolent protests and strikes made it difficult to counter. Gandhi encouraged his followers to practice inner discipline and get ready for independence. Gandhi said that Indians had to prove they were deserving of independence. This is in contrast to independence leaders such as Aurobindo Ghose, who argued that Indian independence was not about whether India would offer better or worse government, but that it was the right for India to have self-government, regardless. Gandhi also clashed with others in the Indian independence movement, such as Subhas Chandra Bose, who advocated direct action to overthrow British control. In 1930, Gandhi led a famous march to the sea in protest at the new Salt Acts. In the sea, they made their own salt in violation of British regulations, and many hundreds were arrested, and Indian jails were full of Indian independence followers. The Salt March covered hundreds of miles, and he picked up followers along the way that marched with him for that protest. He is quoted as saying, "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." This he said after holding up a cup of salt at the end of the Salt March. However, while the campaign was at its peak, some Indian protesters killed some British civilians, and as a result, Gandhi called off the independence movement, saying that India was not yet ready. This broke the heart of many Indians committed to independence, and it led to radicals like Bhagat Singh carrying on the campaign for independence, which was particularly strong in Bengal. Following the war, Britain indicated that they would give India independence. However, with the support of the Muslims led by Jinnah, the British planned to partition India into two, India and Pakistan. Ideologically, Gandhi was opposed to this separation. He worked vigorously to show that Muslims and Hindus could live together peacefully. And of course, we know how well that worked because right now in northern India and Pakistan, there is still conflict and fighting between Hindus and Muslims. However, at Gandhi's prayer meetings, Muslim prayers were read out loud alongside Hindu and Christian prayers. This was his attempt to combine all three and to show that all three were kind of the same and could get along together. Of course, they're not the same, and this was precisely the problem. Gandhi eventually agreed to the partition proposed by Great Britain and spent the Day of Independence in prayer and mourning. Even Gandhi's fasts and appeals were insufficient, however, to prevent the wave of sectarian violence and the killing that followed the partition. Away from the politics of Indian independence, Gandhi was harshly critical of the Hindu caste system. In particular, he inveighed against the untouchable caste, who were treated abysmally by society. He launched many campaigns to change the status of untouchables. Although his campaigns were met with much resistance, they did go a long way to changing century-old prejudices. At age 78, Gandhi undertook another fast to try and prevent sectarian killing. After 5 days, the leaders agreed to stop killing. 10 days later, Gandhi was shot dead, assassinated by a Hindu Brahmin who was opposed to Gandhi's support for Muslims and untouchables. Gandhi declared that his great aim in life was to have a vision of God. He sought to worship God and promote religious understanding. He sought inspiration from many different religions: Jainism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and these were all incorporated by him into his own personal philosophy. On several occasions, he used religious practices and fasting as part of his political approach. He felt that his personal example could influence public opinion. Quote, "When every hope is gone, when helpers fail and comforts flee, I find that help arrives somehow from I know not where. Supplication, worship, prayer are no superstition. They are acts more real than the acts of eating, drinking, sitting, or walking. It is no exaggeration to say that they alone are real. All else is unreal." Unquote, Gandhi. Now, Gandhi's piety is an interesting take on detachment and self-restraint. He seemed to emphasize primarily the doctrine of chastity and viewed chastity as a way of demonstrating his own worthiness. So, in terms of works, chastity became the way that Gandhi attempted to show that he was worthy. It's no secret that he had an unusual sex life. He spoke constantly of sex, and he gave detailed, often provocative instructions to his followers as to how they might best observe chastity. His views were not always popular, sometimes even identified as, quote, abnormal and unnatural, end quote. This is how the first Prime Minister of independent India, Nehru, described Gandhi's advice to newlyweds to stay celibate for the sake of their souls. But there was something more complex than a pious plea for chastity at play in Gandhi's beliefs. His preachings, and even his unusual personal practices, which included, alongside his famed chastity, sleeping naked next to nubile, naked women to test his restraint. In the course of researching Gandhi's life, what was revealed was a somewhat bizarre sexual history. Gandhi was born in the Indian state of Gujarat, and he married at age 13 in 1833. His wife, Kasturba, was 14, not early by the standards of Gujarat at the time. The young couple had a normal sex life, sharing a bed in a separate room in his family home, and Kasturba soon became pregnant. 2 years later, as his father lay dying, Gandhi left his bedside to have sex with Kasturba, and meanwhile his father drew his last breath. The young man compounded his grief with guilt that he had not been present, and represented his subsequent revulsion towards, quote, lustful love, unquote, as being related to his father's demise. However, Gandhi and Kasturba's last child wasn't born until 15 years later in 1900. In fact, Gandhi did not develop his censorious attitude towards sex, and certainly not to marital sex, until he was in his 30s. At that time, he was a volunteer in the Ambulance Corps, assisting the British Empire in its wars in South Africa. On long marches in sparsely populated land, the Boer War and the Zulu uprisings occurred, and Gandhi considered how he could best give service to humanity and decided it must be by embracing poverty and chastity. So at age 38, in 1906, he took the vow of Brahmacharya, which meant living a spiritual life, but is normally referred to as a life of chastity, without which such a life is deemed impossible by Hindus. Gandhi found it easy to embrace poverty. It was chastity that eluded him. So he worked out a series of complex rules which meant he could say he was chaste while still engaging in the most explicit sexual conversation, letters, and behavior. With the zeal of a convert, within a year of his vow, he told readers of his newspaper, Indian Opinion, that it is, quote, the duty of every thoughtful Indian not to marry. In case he is helpless in regard to marriage, he should abstain from sexual intercourse with his wife. Meanwhile, Gandhi was challenging the abstinence in his own way. He set up ashrams in which he began his first, quote, experiments, end quote, with sex. Boys and girls were to bathe and sleep together chastely, but were punished for any sexual talk. Men and women were segregated, and Gandhi's service was that husbands should not be alone with their wives, and when they felt passion, they should take a cold bath. The rules did not, however, apply to him. Sushila Nahar, the attractive sister of Gandhi's secretary, who was also his personal physician, attended Gandhi from girlhood. She used to sleep and bathe with Gandhi, and when challenged, he explained how he ensured decency was not offended. He said, quote, "While she is bathing, I keep my eyes tightly shut," he said. "I do not know whether she bathes naked or with her underwear on. I can tell from the sound that she uses soap." The provision of such personal services to Gandhi was a much sought after sign of his favor and aroused jealousy among ashram inmates. As he grew older, following his wife's death, he was to have more women around him and would oblige women to sleep with him whom, according to his segregated ashram rules, were forbidden to sleep with their own husbands. Gandhi would have women in his bed engaging in his, quote, experiments, unquote, which seemed to have been, from the reading of his letters, an exercise in striptease or other non-contact sexual activities. Much explicit material has been destroyed, but tantalizing remarks in Gandhi's letters remain, such as, quote, "Vena's sleeping with me might be called an accident. All that can be said is that she slept close to me." One might assume, then, that getting into the spirit of the Gandhian experiment meant something more than just sleeping with someone close to one. It can't, one imagines, have helped with the, quote, involuntary discharges, end quote, which Gandhi complained of experiencing frequently since his return to India. He had the almost imagical belief in the power of semen. Quote, "One who conserves his vital fluid acquires unfailing power," end quote, he said. Gandhi's approach to chastity as a means for becoming enlightened is interesting, if not, in some cases, somewhat bizarre. After his wife's death and as he grew older, he continued his practice of sleeping with women naked as an attempt to control his sexual desires. There's much material that was destroyed, but there are some materials that still remain that reveal some of his views concerning this. For example, when Gandhi was 77, Sushila, a woman who was 33 at the time in 1947, was replaced by Gandhi by a woman almost half her age. While in Bengal, to see what comfort he could offer in times of intercommunal violence in the run-up to independence, Gandhi called for his 18-year-old grandniece Manu to join him and sleep with him. He told her that we both may be killed by Muslims and must test our purity ultimately so that we know that we are offering the purest of sacrifices, and we should now start by sleeping together naked. Well, such behavior was no part of the accepted practice of Brahmacharya in Jainism, but it was Gandhi's personal interpretation of that principle. He eventually also incorporated another woman into this practice, and her name was Abha, and she was the wife of Gandhi's grandnephew, Kanu Gandhi. She joined his entourage in the run-up to independence in 1947, and by the end of August, he was sleeping with both Manu and Abha at the same time. While Gandhi's sexual practices and behaviors were discussed as damaging to his reputation while he was alive, this behavior was ignored for a long time following his death. This is, I think, in part due to the desire to lionize Gandhi as some sort of superhero in Jain religious thought and in the political history of India. So it's only been in recent times that we can begin to piece together Gandhi's true views concerning Jainism and enlightenment and the role that chastity played in all of this. Well, what I've said here needs to be understood uh, for what it is. It's simply a recounting of factual information about Gandhi, and it is important because he was such an important figure in Indian history, and yet also uh, perhaps the most well-known believer in Jainism in the history of that religion. Again, this is not meant to disparage or disrespect his basic humanity, because he was human just like every one of us. And every one of us have things in our lives that we struggle with and that sometimes can not cast us in the most positive light. So this is not meant to ill-treat Gandhi in any way. It's simply explaining some of the things that he thought and did. I would also like to talk for a few minutes about the limitations of Jainism due to some of their practices. In particular, the Digambaras, or the sky-clad Jains who practice nudity. Now, you remember earlier in the lecture I said that Jains tended to be limited to a certain section of India. And of course, Jains do not attempt to convert others to their religious views. The Digambaras are a prime example of this limitation, and this is in part due to their practice of nudity. As you can imagine, nudity only works well in certain kinds of climates in certain regions of the world. For example, if you tried to be a Digambara in Alaska in the dead of winter, it would not go well for you. And I'm not being just silly and facetious. That's just a practical understanding of the nature of Digambara Jainism. In addition, both Digambaras and Svetambaras have limitations due to restricted practices concerning ahimsa, or non-harm, non-violence, and the rigid dietary and career opportunities that are available to them. For example, Jains cannot work in some industries, such as food industries like McDonald's, because they would view this as being harmful to other living things. After all, hamburgers are dead cows. In addition, any jobs that might be a threat to other living beings, for example, the paving of roads, or the building of roads, or the building of buildings, construction, these kinds of things, by necessity, involve sometimes the displacement and even the deaths of other creatures. There's also even the problem of natural bodily processes, such as breathing, for example, in which we know the breathing in of air involves also the destruction of microorganisms. So the Jains have a huge problem in terms of practicing ahimsa in its most extreme form. This is also why you see Jains, if you see pictures or videos of Jains with a little broom sweeping the pathway in front of them where they walk. The idea here is to gently remove any living beings from where they step, so they don't step on any living things and cause them to die as a result of that. So, Jainism is a very interesting Indian religion. It tends toward disengagement and disinvolvement concerning any kind of violent practices, from just walking on a path to actually participating in military or militaristic activities as self-defense or as a means to generate political and social change. So, I hope this helps you understand Jainism a little better. Again, I want to thank you for listening to this lecture, and I hope that you're having a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you in an upcoming class session. We will be talking about, as our next area of study and emphases, we will be talking about Sikhism, which is a very interesting religion as well. It does not occur in India until much, much later as a response to the conflict between Hindus and Muslims. And it was an attempt to provide a bridge or a common ground that would bring both of those movements together and bring peace to India. And of course, this was not very successful, is still not successful today. But we will look at Sikhism in the upcoming session, and I will try to help you understand how that religious system works in terms of its beliefs and practices. Thank you.